I've resisted making a video about this topic largely because I don't want it to look like I'm bragging. And to be honest, if you really look at the list of the cars I'm going to talk about, there's very little to brag about except maybe in the past few years. I was persuaded because recently it was suggested by a young friend of mine that my story might be inspirational to others, especially young people who are going through the process of getting to learn about cars and picking what cars they want to modify and all that kind of stuff. So when we're done talking about this, you'll see that some of my cars were, junk. Some of them were halfway decent, and some of them I made worse, and some of them I made better. But we'll get to that right after the break. Confession, I hate cleaning my own cars. That's why I love Adams Polishes. Whatever you want to clean, polish, or shine, Adams has a specific product just for that, even for matte finishes. Since 2000, Adams Polishes has been offering premium car care products dedicated to the enthusiast. Whether you're a professional detailer or a weekend warrior, their innovative and effective products will enable you to achieve amazing results on your prized possession. Adams, made with pride and passion in the USA. I grew up in a place called the Santa Clarita Valley out there in Newhall, Valencia. This happened in the late 1970s and 1980s. Back then it was a rural community famous only for its proximity to Magic Mountain amusement park, right? Most of my friends back then were driving pickup trucks or American cars of all different types. So put your mind back in the 1970s. At this period of time in that town, late 1960s and early 70s, Chevelles, Novas, Camaros, Firebirds, Mustang, and Mavericks roamed the streets. Wednesday night was cruise night on Lyons Avenue, and it was not uncommon to see cars sporting drag setups, things like traction bars, ladder bars, all that for their leaf spring Chevys and Mustangs and that kind of stuff. Cars were, smogging a car wasn't a thing back then, so you could have open exhaust and all that kind of stuff. So if you've ever seen a movie like American Graffiti or Dazed and Confused, you get a pretty good glimpse into what it was like back then for me. I was a big skateboarder for a long time, but by my 14th birthday, I had started taking an interest in cars, and I started reading every published word about car specs in magazines like Car and Driver, Motor Trend, and Road and Track. I knew the horsepower numbers, I knew the 0 to 60 times, I knew the quarter-mile times, the skid pad numbers, and the braking distance all by heart. My parents absolutely did not encourage this hobby at all. As a matter of fact, it annoyed the hell out of them. My early working knowledge of cars came from me hanging out with older kids who were already driving and hanging out in the auto shop, although I was too young to take auto shop. Cars back then were pretty analog. There were no computers, there was no chip tuning, there was no fuel injection, except on some imported cars, mostly German cars, but even then they were using mechanical fuel injection rather than electronic fuel injection, and that technology goes back to World War II. Around 15 and a half, my first job was working at a full-service gas station where I learned basic automotive maintenance. A full-service gas station is one where somebody pumps the gas for you, checks your air and your tires, and fills the oil and that kind of stuff. At 16 and a half, I finally got my first car, which was a hand-me-down from my dad. It was basically his company car, 1981 Isuzu I-Mark. This car was known as the Isuzu Gemini in some parts of the world. The engine was a 1.8 liter and it made about 80 horsepower, and although my car was automatic, I wasn't having it. The engine had been used in the mid to late 1970s Chevy LUV pickups, so there was a bit of an aftermarket for it. I ended up switching it over to a 4-speed manual conversion, which I did in my driveway, working from a Chilton's repair manual. There was no internet and there was no YouTube. I later added an Offenhauser intake manifold and a Weber carburetor and a header. By that time, the car probably made 80, maybe 85 horsepower or 90 all in, something like that. So I decided to make it look cool. I painted the car Indian Porsche red. I made a custom modified front air dam that was designed for a Mazda GLC of that time. I basically sectioned it to make it a little bit narrow and fix the car. I created my own side skirts, and I played with that car for a while. From there, I fell in love with the 1973 V6 Capri. The exhaust setup on that car was unbelievable, and it made some glorious sounds out of the tailpipes, and it produced a little bit over 120 horsepower, but it revved like a race car right to the red line. It was very, very fun car. After grenading the cam gear, which destroyed the crank gear, this engine did not use a timing chain, it was in cam gear. I had to rebuild the engine, and I had no idea I was going to do it. My parents certainly weren't going to help me out. So back to the Chilton's repair manual I went, and I went out and bought the parts, which were relatively very inexpensive back then. Well, not if you're making $4 an hour, right? So I basically just put it up on jack stands, and I rebuilt the engine in my parents' garage. I had limited tools. My dad got his tools at like the grocery store. So I had to borrow a lot of stuff that I didn't have. But somehow I got through it, and when I was all done, the car actually started up, to my surprise. After that, I upgraded the carburetor to a Holley 500, and after that, there just wasn't much left to do, largely because there wasn't much more in the way of aftermarket support. No one was really making performance parts for that car. And I learned a very important lesson. If you're gonna buy a car, make sure there's aftermarket support for cool parts or don't touch it. By this time, though, I was making a little bit better money, and I finally bought my first Datsun Z car. This first one that I bought looked pretty good, but when I started digging into it and getting into the car, there was significant rust under the floor panels and the rocker panels. So I decided to start with another Z, and I found myself a wide body 1970 240Z. This was my first wide body car. With that car, I had a triple Webers, which were fun to synchronize, a Lighten flywheel, and some kick-ass audio components from Denon and Orion. Yes, I was into tunes back in the day. No, I won't tell you what kind of music I was listening to because you probably laughed. Eventually, though, I decided that the wide body thing was a little bit too gaudy for me, and I found myself a nice, clean 1974 260Z, which had two very important features: zero rust and air conditioning. It was at that moment I learned that a certain thing about myself: if the car doesn't have air conditioning, you're probably not going to be interested in the car for very, very long. From the period from like 1984 to 1989, I went through a variety of cars, including a Honda Accord hatchback in 1981 and a Fiat Spider, which I don't know what I was thinking. It was kind of my comfort and cool phase. I wanted a car with an air conditioning, and then I wanted a drop top so my girlfriend would really like it. The Honda Accord was my attempt at a rally car. It had off-road lights, mud flaps, and a fragile oil pan. It turns out it wasn't a very good rally car. The Fiat Spider was my first foray in Italian cars. I lost a second gear synchro within a month, and it had caught fire once, which was interesting, but chicks absolutely loved it. I bought an Audi Fox, which lost a CV joint about 2 months into ownership, but I did love that car, and I learned that working on front wheel drive cars brings some interesting challenges. But then after that, I started missing my old Japanese cars again, so I went through a couple of Datsun 510s, one for my girlfriend, a four-door that she wanted, and one for myself. These cars were not fast enough for me, even with the modifications I did. So I found myself an ugly brown 70 Camaro that nobody seemed to want, and I bought that. Eventually, I got into some Firebirds, a couple of Firebirds. I took parts from one to finish the second one. So once I had a working Firebird, I basically traded it for a Datsun 620 pickup with a small block Chevy because it did monster burnouts. But after driving it around in the rainy season, I realized it wasn't very practical. It was always trying to kill me. And frankly, taking a girl out on a date on a loud, smelly pickup truck was not cool. So I compromised and bought another Z car, this one with the V8, and that car was absolutely gorgeous. It was a beautiful car. That was fun as hell, and it got a lot of looks, but then summer came and I was miserable again. So I said, I'm gonna go buy something with air conditioner, and it's just a cruiser. So I bought a little Nissan Pulsar NX, the American version, not the cool version Japan or Australia got. That car had I believe a CA18DE engine, dual overhead cam. It was decent. A little later, I picked up a Maxima. There's an 89 or 90 for my girlfriend, and I fell in love with the engine, and it's the reason that I eventually came to own two more Maximas in the late 1990s. One was a white GXE or GLE for the wife, and a white SE for myself. This white SE became the Fast and Furious Maxima, of course. I bought the second Maxima as a commuter car for me. I was driving a long distance every day. But I decided at some point that I wanted to change it up, so I painted it blue, did a reverse hood, and all the supercharger and all kind of stuff. But I'm jumping ahead here. So going back to the Pulsar, that car was replaced with a brand new 1993 Mustang GT. I actually added a nitrous system to that car the day that I drove it home from the dealership. And that car was a hoot and went through 3 iterations. One was just a street car, and then it turned into a drag car, and then it turned into a street car again. It was absolutely nuts. Eventually, I got into the motor. I added a GT40 intake, BBK throttle body, 355 gears, and long tube headers, all the bolt-on stuff. Then I got bit by the blower bug and decided to add a Vortex supercharger. The first setup made about 6 PSI, and then, changing the belt and the pulley, and then you get 8 PSI. And then after that, the stock head gasket popped, and so I replaced it, ARP studs and all that kind of stuff. It blew again, and this time it cracked the ring lands on 2 of the engine's hyperotectic pistons. The 1993 had those hyperotectic pistons, which were rubbish. So basically it was rebuild time. Fortunately, Saleen Performance, by sheer luck, was right across the street from where I was working at the NGK building back then. So I went over there and talked to Steve Saleen. They built me a nice 306 and a custom spec fuel system to make sure we had enough fuel. Bigger radiator and bigger clutch and that kind of stuff. I then switched to an upgraded cog drive Vortex supercharger and drove that around for a while, and I was having a lot of fun with it. It was a SEMA car a couple years in a row. When another head gasket popped, it was time to make a bigger change. So what did I do? I decided to change the heads to TFS twisted wedge heads. In the middle of doing that work, I decided to build a new engine. I figured if this thing was all torn down, why don't we just do it the right way? So I went to Coast High Performance, picked up a 347 stroker with forged pistons, forged H-beam rods, a Lunati's custom spec camshaft, and so on. The fuel system got upgraded to SX pumps, an SX regulator, and we used AN10 and AN8 lines for fuel. By this time, the car was pretty much no longer a drag car. It was basically a road car and actually a daily driver. I would do canyon runs with the thing, so I had to change the diff, and then I went over to Hotchkiss suspension to get some components, added some beefy bare brakes, and the car was a good, reliable daily driver and a fun canyon car. Inside, just a few things. I had some comfy, supportive, flow-fit seats, an NHRA legal roll cage in case I wanted to go back to the track, and a modest stereo system, which actually sounded really good. It was just built for sound quality, so it didn't have to be all that fancy. I also changed the wheels to Ozzy Fittipaldi's 18 inches all around, and with over 500 horsepower on tap, the glorious whine of the supercharger, this was my favorite car up to that point, and I held on to that car for almost 5 years. But then I needed a daily again, so I picked up a 1996 Impala SS with silver SS stripes and ghost checkered flags that I had put into the paint and into the stripes. That car also had a 150 shot of nitrous, and I used it often. By often, I mean like at least once a week. Getting on the freeway, that kind of stuff. But in 1998, a little incident on the freeway changed my mind about Mustangs and changed my life. It seems that a little modest-looking Mark IV Super pulled up to me, gave me the thumbs up and 3 honks, and we all know what that means. He beat me fair and square and easily put 5 car lengths on me, and that got me shopping for a Mark IV right away. So, the Mustang went up for sale shortly after that encounter, but the car was actually stolen before the new buyer could actually take delivery of the car. I spent the next 2 months fighting with the insurance company to get something reasonable, and then when I had a few extra bucks in my pocket, I replaced the Mustang with the white 1994 Supra, which of course is the Supra that became the Fast and Furious Supra. I've covered this car in a couple of videos, so if you want to learn about it, you can go back and watch those videos. The Supra made about 560 horsepower when it was all done, and when I got the car back from Universal, I had replaced it with a 1999 R34 GTR, which of course became the Too Fast, Too Furious Skyline. My 99 Maxima, which was still in the family, was replaced shortly thereafter with the 2003 BMW M3, the blue one. I don't know if you've seen it on my website. The M3 got a Flossman wide body kit, custom-made 20-inch HRE wheels, courtesy of Bob Hale, 15-inch StopTech brakes in the front, 14-inch in the rear, and a custom audio-video system that I designed, how it would be installed, that kind of thing, but the audio experts from Kenwood spec'd all the equipment for me. The car was painted Lamborghini Monterey blue, and I had that car for a while, and I sold it about 4 years later, and that car still resides in South Carolina with the third owner of the car, and he's taking great care of it. From there, after the BMW M3, I went on to a 2003 Porsche 996 Turbo in speed yellow. Other than chip tuning and exhaust, that car was bone stock. It was about this time that I decided to have a civilized sports car. The 996 Turbo was certainly that. The R34 that I had, of course, was sold in 2003, and so to replace that, I decided to go with a 1998 Lamborghini Diablo Monterey Edition SV. This is a car that was formerly driven by Mario Andretti on the Running of the Bulls. I had to replace the yellow pimpish interior of the Lamborghini with some tan suede because it was not in good shape and it was ugly. That car too got a nitrous system. It was a very fun car, but it attracted too many cougars and too many gold diggers, not to mention it was notoriously unreliable. So that car went. I replaced the blue Diablo with a 2001 Diablo 6.0, also a fun car, much better built, but still a terrible track car, and then I realized I needed to have a dual-purpose car, one that I could take to the track and one that I can drive fast. Before long, I missed having a Japanese car in my garage, so I went out and did something stupid again. I bought a 1998 TRD wide-body Supra. This one was originally built by Ryan Woon, and this car was absolutely magnificent. Yes, it was more of a dyno queen and a show car, and it was really brutal, and it was basically only uses to go to Cars and Coffee weekend car meets and that kind of stuff, or do, full speed runs. By this time, I was still determined to find a gentleman's sports car and something more luxurious. So in 2006, I picked up a Mercedes SL600, which is a twin-turbo V12 engine. That was my cruiser, and then I went into a CLK 55, which was actually for my lady. She didn't like that, was too much for her, so she went to the CLK 500. I bought each one of these Mercedes brand new, but each of them were in the shop, and I mean often. After some really bad experience, I got rid of all of them. They were all gone, and I've never owned a Mercedes again. In 2007, though, I was lucky enough to drive a B7 Audi RS4 across the USA during the Bull Run Road Rally. I love that car so much, I ordered one for myself while still on the rally. It was delivered to me about 4 months later, and I held on to that car for about 5 years. That was my play car, my camera car, all that kind of stuff. To stop putting miles on that car, I picked up a BMW 750 Li, which was very good to haul clients around. By that time, I was dating a girl who had a BMW 335 that we had picked up. Of course, she wouldn't let me touch it. And it was a fun car, but the 750 was getting to be a big problem. Actually, it was so unreliable, I had to get rid of that car as well. Just like with my Mercedes, I've never owned a BMW since. So there's several other cars I've owned that are not on my list, and I've only haven't mentioned them because they were commuter cars and that kind of thing. And as such, they were unmolested, so there's really no backstory there. Let's talk about the things that I want to communicate to young people who are building cars right now. I made this video basically to show that I've had a fair amount of experience with different brands and platforms. I've not always been a Japanese car guy or a German car guy or an Italian car guy. Or didn't like muscle cars. Nothing of the sort. Second, to show that I was never given anything, probably like you. I busted my butt for every car that I had, and when I was young, I had no choice but to fix my own cars. So I know what you're going through if you're one of those people. And lastly, to give people some advice about the car hobby that I learned the hard way, which I don't want you to learn the hard way. So I know you don't want to hear this kind of stuff from your parents, but I'm not your parents, so let me put it to you this way. For young people who are just starting out in life, the notion of fixing up a crappy car is absolutely insane. I know it, I've tried it many times. There's no point in throwing money into a 2002 V6 Mustang because it'll never be fast enough to hang with a similarly modded V8 Mustang. And if you tell me you can go on supercharge it and make it as fast as a V8 Mustang, fine, but when the V8 Mustang adds a supercharger, you're getting gapped. I've spent tons of money on crummy cars over the years. My first car was a perfect example, and the money I spent on the paint, the engine work, and all the other modifications I did to the car, I literally calculated that I could have bought my first Datsun Z in cash. So that's something I learned pretty quickly on. So if you really have to waste your money on modifying crummy cars, spend your money instead just on a couple of modifications, which should be nice wheels that can be sold or transferred to another car later, and then a set of iBox springs, and call it a day. It's all about the stance of the car, the rake of the car. If you get that set up and good fitments, it's a great thing. Another piece of advice, removing your mufflers and resonators off your naturally aspirated car won't make any more horsepower. It just robs you of torque down low and changes where the peak power is, moves the power band up. Now, if you're thinking you're going to pick up 20 more horsepower in a late model car, it just doesn't work like that. That trick worked back in the 1970s with the crummy exhaust systems the cars had from the factory, but with today's modern cars, the exhaust systems have to be super efficient to reduce pollution and to achieve high mileage targets. All you're doing is attracting the police attention, who are going to pull you over, and all you're going to do is annoy your neighbors and not impress anybody who knows anything about cars. So consider spending your money on something else. Another important lesson, if you don't have the mechanical skill to install a part that you bought, take it to a professional. If you don't have the money to take it to a professional, you certainly don't have the money to try and fix it yourself, and then when you realize that you can't do it, you have to take it to a professional anyway. A lesson I learned with that Audi Fox. The car stance is 90% of the battle, is what I'm saying. No matter what car you drive, if you can just get the proper rake, choose good wheels, and achieve the perfect wheel setup and offset, your car will be admired by everybody. It doesn't matter what's under the hood or how old it is. You'll earn the respect of your fellow car enthusiasts if you can just get the wheel fitment and the stance correct. Today I own only two cars, my 2015 GTR and our 2018 Audi S3. Both have been flawless and have proven to be great by every single measure. At the peak, we had probably 5 or 6 cars in the family. In a place where most garages house 2 or 3 cars maximum, this is simply impractical, and I'm sure not moving out to a rural community so that I can have a 10-car garage. So we cut back. So I'm very happy with the 2 cars I have, and it took me a long time to get here, but my days of flipping cars are over. Why? I've had my fun. I've owned some great cars, some amazing cars, and I've driven many other amazing cars, but ultimately it comes down to one thing: you can only drive one car at a time. But if I was forced to say what cars I would like to do next, I would like to do another S30 Datsun Z. I would like to maybe do a McLaren, but the horror stories I hear from owners, past and current, have kind of turned me off about the mechanical issues and the cost of the repairs and all that kind of stuff. But of course, right now I'm in the midst of building a replica of my movie Super, so I'd like to get through that first. This is your hobby. Hobbies are not obligated to be cheap or affordable. So if you really want it, you got to go out and work for it. But don't be in a rush. If you're young, You have plenty of time. I consider myself lucky to grow up through a very interesting period. The cars from the 1960s and the 1970s. The 60s cars were fun, the 70 cars were horrible. Some people say the cars from the 1973 all the way through to about 1988 were junk, and I will agree with that. But now we're in a great period of time where these cars are absolutely fantastic. So even if you're buying a mediocre car today, it's way better than the stuff we were driving back then. So don't let it get you down. There's plenty of time. You're gonna get yourself some cool cars eventually if you just keep working hard. Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.